fiscal, social, and environmental and economic realities. It is framed to ensure that budgetary choices advance social and economic justice and environmental stability. We're happy to be involved in the process this year, and we all know that we must move away from the perpetual low-wage economy that harms many workers, families, and an environment. This budget prioritizes a just transition and the building of a diverse, green, caring economy from the ground up, where workers have a meaningful say. It invests in strengthening worker protections and creating conditions for decent jobs and fair wages while addressing pay and employment inequity. And now I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. First up will be Christine Saulnier. Dr. Saulnier is the Nova Scotia Director of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. She leads the living wage calculations for communities in Atlantic Canada, is a co-author of this year's budget, and she conceived at the Nova Scotia Alternative Budget Working Group this year and did so for 10 years previously. Following Christine will be Alexandra Rose. Alexandra is a provincial coordinator for the Nova Scotia Health Coalition. The Nova Scotia Health Coalition is an organization of like-minded individuals dedicated to protecting and strengthening the public healthcare system. And following Alexandra will be Alec Stratford. Alec Stratford is the executive director from the Registrar of the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers, and he's also with the Nova Scotia Action Coalition for Community Wellbeing. So Christine, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Danny. Good morning, everyone. What a fantastic turnout. So great to see so many collaborators today. You know, I was thinking this morning, what if this was the real budget and I was the real Minister of Finance? Apparently there's something about like buying new shoes or something. I don't know what that tradition is, but I was thinking, oh, what did I buy most recently? Well, I had to go buy some new clothes to my kid who once again has grown and needs. I was watching him walk out the door the other day and could see his ankles. And maybe that's symbolic. Maybe that's symbolic of the vision that I'd like to see for Nova Scotia, and that is one where we take care of each other, where we enable families to be able to provide all the needs that their children have. And the fact that I have to buy clothes for my child is about what I hope is a vision for the province, which is child-centered, family-centered, community-centered. So there, I bought a couple of t-shirts and some pants for my kid. Unfortunately, I'm not your Minister of Finance, or maybe, but I am happy to talk to you about our alternative budget this year. I'm glad to be able to come back to a process where we come together and talk across sectors about what our priorities and vision is for the province. I'm not going to take more than about 8 minutes of your time. Lauren has put the document there, and there's a lot in it. There's a couple of pages of our detailed proposals of how we would spend money. So I do encourage you to have a look, but I'm going to try and summarize where we landed this year. Thanks again to all of our collaborators. This year's alternative budgets theme is Leave No One Behind. It shows us we can and we must implement an alternative vision. For too long, governments have neglected to address structural inequalities and systemic inequities that prevent Nova Scotians from reaching their full potential. For too long, too many Nova Scotians have been struggling to make ends meet, including leaving parents unable to provide what their children need. The path we have been on for decades has left many of us depleted and even fearful of the future. Generations of young people are trapped under the weight of student debt and are now facing multiple crises: climate, housing, healthcare, to name a few. We really can no longer focus on economic growth for growth's sake. We need to consider who shares in that growth and whether it is beneficial or harmful to human health, our planet, and our well-being as a society. Similarly, we cannot just focus on job creation without considering the quality and kind of jobs created. As we transition, and we must, to a greener economy, we need to help workers adapt to changing skill needs. We need to also center jobs in the caring economy. These are the principles that are embedded in this year's alternative budget. To implement this alternative vision, we require change in how we tax and how we spend. It requires us to really come to terms with the scale and the scope of the investment that's needed to transform our way of living before it's too late. As our alternative budget shows, Nova Scotia is actually in a strong economic and fiscal position, and it can address the most pressing problems facing our province while maintaining a fiscally responsible approach. The alternative budget invests an additional $1.5 billion in net operating expenditures. And while we project deficits for the next 3 years, the debt to GDP ratio remains sustainable, which means it's manageable. Our debt servicing costs have gone down dramatically to less than 5% of expenditures. And while interest rates have gone up, they are not likely to stay high. And the long-term interest rates at which the Nova Scotia government borrows are still very low. Remember, the government is not a household. And unlike a household, inflation benefits governments in terms of additional revenue. Underestimating Nova Scotia's fiscal strength is actually common and problematic, especially when it's used to justify spending restraint or hide what is possible, thus lowering our expectations. I say we need to raise our expectations. We know the impact that reducing poverty has on those living it. That's why we invest to bring everyone on income assistance to the poverty line within the next 3 years. We know the impact that having an affordable place to live has on those who are on the street and those who are at risk of losing their house. That is why our biggest capital investment is almost $700 million to build new public and nonprofit housing. And that's for each of the next 10 years. We know what a difference it would make if people could get access to the public services they need. That is why we invest in removing pharmacare and ambulance fees and expand access to healthcare while investing in early childhood educators' wages and further expanding childcare, as well as investing in interregional and community public transportation and a new Crown Corporation. We know the importance of investing in the next generation, from early learning to making sure that people can attain affordable post-secondary education. Indeed, free community college is what is in our alternative budget. Stop paying interest rates on those loans. Let's convert them to grants. Stop saddling young people and their families with debt for their education. We know the importance of making our province more able to use its own resources to provide for its population needs, including for food. And so we invest in small sustainable farms and more food processing here. We invest to support cooperatives and all kinds of ways to ensure that workers and consumers have more say in what is being produced right here and how. We have shown what it would cost, and we have shown how to pay for these important investments. On the how to pay side, we make changes that would make our tax system more progressive, ensuring that everyone pays their fair share, raising an additional $500 million a year. We also reallocate some tax cuts and some tax refunds and some spending. What our budget doesn't account for are the spin-offs and the return on investment from what we outline. These spin-offs and the return on investment are enormous, from the number of jobs created to the revenue generated to what we do to help every Nova Scotian to reach their potential. Additional income supports from the government to low-income people, that provides an income base. They will spend it in our economy, locally, impacting sales tax. Investments such as in childcare, the earlier we invest in children, the better the return on investment. Investments in post-secondary education, investments in reducing poverty with an urgency for children. All of those have spin-off effects in terms of supporting everyone to reach their full potential that increases productivity as well as income taxes from the newly employed. Building an inclusive economy, valuing the diversity of people and skills, transitioning to renewable energy, and stopping the extractive ecological destruction while we diversify our economy, while we sell, produce, and buy more locally, while we enhance public services and build a strong safety net to better care for each other. That's what makes us a stronger province. It makes us ready to mitigate the next disaster, and better yet, it can prevent it. That's what the alternative budget seeks to do. And I'm going to end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Very interesting, especially when we consider the benefits of local shopping and local purchasing that people do. Next up, we're going to have Alexandra Rose from the Nova Scotia Health Coalition. Alexandra.
Hi. All right, so Nova Scotia is facing a healthcare crisis. For far too long, our healthcare system has been unable to meet the needs of our population. The alternative budget accounts for both a reactive and a preventative approach for solving this crisis. We must look at issues on the front lines of healthcare, problems that Nova Scotians deal with every day, and problems we often see in the news. Hospitals at 100% capacity and long wait times to get into long-term care facilities, over 130,000 Nova Scotians with no primary care physician, and staffing issues. The alternative budget places emphasis on investing in long-term care, both staffing and enforcement of national standards, as well as expanding home care services and home support services. While continuing the recruitment and retention of family doctors, the alternative budget also invests in converting family doctors to salary, following a model being used in British Columbia. The goal of this is to stabilize family practice as well as make it more sustainable and rewarding. We know our staffing issues do not stop at family doctors. This is why the alternative budget invests in hiring more skilled professionals and increasing the wages of the lowest paid healthcare workers in order for all professionals that can take on a primary role have the support to be able to take their care to its full potential. The social determinants of health. The socioeconomic factors that affect individual and population health cannot be ignored. In comes the preventative action. Often overlooked in the lens of healthcare system issues, preventative care is essential to a sustainable and accessible healthcare system. For this reason, the alternative budget significantly invests in areas that tackle social inequalities that often lead to health inequalities, such as addressing gaps in mental health care, investing in community-based harm reduction services and supports, increased income assistance, housing support, and establishing fair wages and employment equity, among others. Nova Scotia's Department of Health and Wellness's mission is to lead a quality, equitable, and sustainable healthcare system that inspires and promotes the health and well-being of all people in Nova Scotia. How do we achieve a quality, equitable, and sustainable healthcare system? By investing in community-based, multidisciplinary, collaborative teams, by providing additional support to existing community health centers within our public healthcare system, and investing in new ones. Not by continuing to invest in a patchwork of for-profit delivery methods that are unable to fill the gaps within our system. Private for-profit services cost more and deliver less. Instead, the alternative budget invests in community health centers. They are community-centered with community-elected governance structures and integrated community partnerships. Community health centers are the best choice because they have a proven track record for supporting collaborative teams of primary care providers with healthcare providers, allied health professionals, and social support services. This also addresses the social determinants of health. This crisis will not be fixed by the provincial government's continued investment in private for-profit services and private-public partnerships. We have seen a pattern of increased for-profit clinics as well as a private-public partnerships when it comes to our healthcare infrastructure. We must pay close attention to the newest bilateral healthcare agreement, wherein $491 million is not tied to some accountability to the federal government for how that money is spent. The provincial government also recently released its capital funding plan to strengthen healthcare infrastructure. We need to watch closely to see how much of this $491 million is used for for-profit delivery and how much of the capital funds are invested in our healthcare infrastructure. Using these funds to support private-public partnerships is not the solution we need to strengthen our healthcare infrastructure. The alternative budget shows us that there is an alternative vision for the future of our public healthcare system, a way to fix this crisis that does not include further investment in private for-profit delivery methods, and provides a way to create a quality, equitable, and healthcare system that promote the health and well-being of all Nova Scotians. Thank you.
Thanks, Alec, and thanks for raising many important things around the privatization creep, as I call it, that we see happening here in Nova Scotia. So next up, we have Alex Stratford. Alex?
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. So happy that the alternative budget is back as well. What a powerful tool for us to be able to paint a picture and point to the plan on what could be in Nova Scotia. I'm here today to talk about the social and economic inequalities that exist, more specifically, the impact of poverty and its relation to child and family well-being, and an alternative for how we can tackle core issues. So poverty is a political choice created by chosen policy approaches to social welfare that either underfund or refuse to fix social programs we know are inadequate to bring families and people above the poverty line. As you all know, Nova Scotia has the highest provincial poverty rate in the entire country, and children and young adults between ages 18 and 24 are particularly affected, with individuals living alone as well, suffering tremendously high rates. The fact that poverty has been left to fester represents an economic and socially reckless approach to governing in the public interest. As inequality continues to rise in Nova Scotia, so too does the feeling of despair. Despair, as we know, is a complete lack of hope. In that environment, that leads to increased anxiety, illness, social isolation, leading to the greater need for services such as emergency room care, policing, and mental health care. The current approach to tackling social economic inequality, fortified by consecutive governments' budgeting processes and the myth of scarcity, relies on addressing social and economic inequality through outdated assumptions that place all of the responsibility for removing barriers to well-being on individual choices. This approach does not consider structural barriers or societal conditions which continue to drive inequality, such as inadequate wages, lack of access to good, decent work and jobs, housing costs, food costs, or discrimination based on gender, race, disability, and other identities. As the CCPA has also informed us, poverty is costly. Costs the province over $2 billion a year to allow poverty to fester. What is so important and exciting about the Nova Scotia alternative budget is that it provides hope. Hope for those feeling despair, and a clear vision for what could be in our province. As the CCPA has also pointed out last week in their child and family poverty report card, is that children cannot wait. We cannot wait for all of these systems to just correct themselves. They have to be corrected. And it's undeniable that poverty has a profound impact on child development, and that family income is an especially powerful factor in dictating development, as is access to supportive services to children and families. If we want child and family well-being, as the province of Nova Scotia has indicated, we have to invest in kids and their families, and the alternative budget does just this. Again, it creates investments heavily in lifting individuals and family out of poverty, again, with the goal of having everyone up to the poverty line over the next 3 years. It increases that income support, introduces extensions to the Nova Scotia Child Benefit, and of course extends the affordable living tax credit, all which are reasonable, practical solutions to the current challenges that we face. All of which, of course, are intended to increase that economic security among those affected by poverty and to ensure that our social safety net actually works the way it is intended to. As well, what the investments do in the alternative budget is finally move to core funding for the community sector so that they can be the advocates and the service providers that we need. In addition to providing these income supports, The Nova Scotia alternative budget makes significant investments in collaborative healthcare, childcare services, post-secondary education, public transportation, and of course, affordable food production and distribution. And all of these investments are essential to ensuring there are robust pathways for children and families to reach well-being and to ensure that each child can reach their full potential. Folks, it can be done. This report shows that. I am certainly tired of hearing that there isn't enough, or that, again, we have to make tough choices. The choices are clear. We can afford to bring every child in Nova Scotia to above the poverty line and ensure that they have a future where they can reach their full potential. Part of this as well, of course, is to address some of the major areas in our economy, such as our minimum wage and living wage, that also lend to an exploitive labor environment. We can all agree that no one should be forced to live in poverty because they don't have enough money, which is why we need to continue supporting initiatives like those funded and costed out here in the alternative budget. I hope you join me over the next month as the budget process unfolds on holding government to account as to what could be, and to push through the rhetoric that we don't have enough, we can't afford it, or these are tough choices. Those are all myths. And again, together we can create a future in which everyone's left, when no one's left behind, and ensure that we're not allowing children to wait for some future where they can reach their full potential, that future is now. Appreciate the opportunity to speak this morning.
Thank you, Alec, and what a great idea through the budget to talk about investing in our kids and investing in people and our communities. Thanks to all three speakers that we had so far. So we're going to try some questions from some people, specifically the reporters that we may have in the audience. If you just want to enter a question that you have in the chat and let us know if you're a reporter and who you're with and who your questions are directed to. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat when we get flooded there. Lauren's going to help me, so hopefully we'll do this as efficiently as we can. Okay, so we have one question. There's a question in the chat. It's from Yvette. We often hear stakeholders express frustration that despite their wealth of knowledge and experience, they're not truly listened to by government. Do any of you have any confidence that your alternative budget will be taken seriously? And can you give an elevator pitch around your concerns about what happens if its key components aren't?
Perhaps I can start, and if anybody wants to add. And I think, Yvette, what you're getting at is perhaps part of why we do this. So what is the purpose of the alternative budget? And absolutely it is about influencing the government budget, but we are releasing a week before the budget's already done. So, you know, we're not going to influence, they're not going to change their minds between now and next week. And while that is obviously primary, it really is about ensuring that we hold our government to account for the choices that they do make and that they will make next week. So we'll look closely at what can we expect, and our alternative budget really does raise that bar. It shows what we could expect from them. We could expect them to actually reduce poverty in a very significant way, including for children, but not just. These are the expectations that we want to lay out in a way that's very pragmatic. So the budget this in some ways, it's the most comprehensive document that we release, but it isn't different from the other reports that we've released all year. As I think Alec outlined, we just released the child poverty report card last week. This fits with the recommendations we make in that report too. It fits with our living wage report and the recommendations that we make there. These are not necessarily new. Again, this is much more comprehensive and much more detailed and puts a cost in. And so our expectation is that it's about holding our government to account, whether that's directly in terms of the budget for next week, but also it's about who you see on this call and who was involved in the alternative budget working group. It's about bringing people together so that we collectively raise our expectations and raise the expectations of our neighbors and our communities as we make that change happen. The kind of change that we're asking for is fundamental systems and structures change that will bring everybody up in this province. If we don't move the needle on this, we will stay stuck where we are, which is continually in crisis, and then we maybe solve that, and then we're into another crisis next time. It's at a place where we have to take much more seriously the investment required to address GH emissions, to address the climate crisis. It is urgent that we actually fundamentally shift, because not only will it help those who are in those low wage jobs, but it helps everyone in our province. The short-sighted vision that is often tied to electoral politics won't get us to where we need to go. And we know that governments aren't moved to make these kinds of changes that are about shifting the status quo by simply producing a report that shows what they need to do. This is why we come together, and this is why we also rely on our media to talk about what these ideas are so that we hear more about the alternatives that exist.
I just want to expand on what Christine was saying a little bit to that's question is that, I think there are multiple elevator pitches depending on the audience. The first one that I would give if I was talking to a member of the public is to remind members of the public that we elect government to serve our interests, not the other way around. Again, we are, their primary goal is to make sure that we create systems and structures that work for all of us. And that the alternative budget represents what that could be. If I were talking to government, particularly this government, I would say that if their goal is to fix healthcare, as they have been elected on, that a failure to implement the measures in this budget will ensure that they fail at their mandate as well. We cannot talk about fixing healthcare without talking about the aberration that is poverty in our province and what that represents to our overall health, our services, and our quality of care that we receive. If we do not address, again, income inequality, which, again, it's been proven time and time again that jurisdictions that have greater economic equality do better in almost every outcome, whether it be health, crime, education, a productive economy. As income inequality grows, it takes us further away from those markers. So again, I think there's multiple pitches that need to be delivered here. But again, stress the point that it is government that works for the interest of the people, and that we are the people that are demanding a real reform and change to how our core services, systems, and structures are resonating and are formed.
Oh, thanks, Alan. So we have another question from Megan King from Global. The report speaks to prioritizing the use of intersectional lens when making budget decisions. Can you speak about why this is so important? I don't know who wants to go first.
I'll start.
Yeah. Okay.
We have a whole section on why an intersectional lens is so important. And by an intersectional lens, what I'm really trying to get at and underline is one of the reasons that we publish the alternative budget is to make clear what the impact of government's decisions to allocate resources to something or not allocate resources to something or to tax in a particular way has implications for different people because of the position that they are in our society, whether that's because they face racism, sexism, ableism. Their position in our society means that they will be impacted differently depending on government decision. And our government budget often doesn't make clear. Actually, it doesn't make clear at all. So there's been calls, for example, for our government budget to actually produce a full gender-based analysis plus assessment of its costs and spending, as well as its revenue decisions, which would really show who actually benefits from the decisions that government makes. Some of the examples that we provide in the budget in terms of trying to show what it would mean if we used an intersectional lens is looking at issues such as in investing in public services. So if you think about the investment in public services, you need to think about who uses public services and who's employed in those public services. More women are employed in the public sector and in public services than men. Public service jobs tend to be unionized, good paying jobs for the most part. If there are any underinvestment in those jobs, you're actually underinvesting in women's work because largely healthcare, childcare, lots of our public sector and caring economy, that's women that's doing that work. If you are not providing supports in terms of lifting people out of poverty, then you're not addressing some of the race, gender, ability, inequalities that exist, because who's impacted by that? Who lives in poverty? We know that there are a higher proportion of African Nova Scotians who live in poverty. We know that we in fact have the highest percentage of the population who has a disability. If we aren't supporting and thinking through how we are investing and what the impact of that is, then we will continue to perpetuate the inequalities instead of actually addressing them. And that's what we do in the budget. So at every point we think about, well, what can we do here? So in education, we think about how we need to be putting more investment in African Nova Scotians in the school system. When we think about some of the other public services, so healthcare, home care, think about who does, because of the gender division of labor in our society, who does the unpaid caregiving. The last stat that I saw said that, and I'm looking it up, that 28% of Nova Scotians are unpaid caregivers who spend 220 million hours a year caring. Imagine if we actually paid for that work. That would be quite an impact on our GDP. Imagine if we supported those caregivers and actually invested in home care in a real way so that they could have a caring relationship with their whoever they're caring for, that isn't about them being their nurse, but is actually about caring for the relationship that exists. And how do we think that through if we're not investing in home care and in long-term care? Because what we've seen is we invest in long-term care and in home care, and we expect others to actually fill in the gap. So who are the others that are filling in the gap? Let's use that intersectional lens in a real way and think through, that's the spending side. On the taxation side, it is very similar. More women are in low paid work. If you look at the disparities in pay and employment equity that exists, whether that's between women or whether that's between white and Black in our province, we look at the racial gap. It's important that we think through the fact that women actually earn less, their income is less. If you are making any changes to the tax system, like a tax credit, women will benefit less from that than men will. African Nova Scotians will benefit less than men will. And we need to look very closely at the changes that we make in our tax system. I mean, we use an example that people might wonder why. We actually canceled the Nova Scotia Art and Fitness Credit. It's a tax credit. And it says if you spend at least up to $500 on an art or a sport for your child, then you get to claim that on your taxes. And there's lots of misconceptions about what that means. Why would we cancel it? Because who can afford to put $500 up to $500 on arts and sports in our province? Those who can already afford to do that. not those who are struggling to provide food for their children. That tax credit at the end of the day doesn't mean you get $500 back. It means that you get maybe $40 back, maybe, depends on your tax rate. The higher the taxes you pay, the bigger your benefit. We have a progressive tax system. We need it to be more progressive, but that is the reality. Yet at the end of the day, that maybe $40 that you get back, it actually represents almost 5 million in lost revenue to our government. So what can we do with that 5 million? That's why we want to spotlight the decisions that our government is making, that we could be reallocating some things and really thinking through, how do we best use our resources? Yes, we raise taxes, but we also think through who's paying those taxes. How do we make it fair? How do we make sure that actually everybody is lifted up in our province and benefits instead of the few, which is really the reality of what exists?
Thanks, Christine. Alec, do you have any comments you want to make at this point, or Alec?
No,
further?
Christine, as always, was brilliant in that explanation.
Okay, so I don't see any other questions from reporters. I'm going to read the last 3 comments we have, and maybe we can close with any comments that anyone has after I read the 3 comments. So there's a bit of a discussion from William about a guaranteed minimum income and whether that's discussed in the report or not, and maybe where people are at with that. From Stella, who's nice, the government is invested in several post-secondary institutions on various aspects of healthcare, including the National Collaborating Center at St. FX and the research centers, but the social detriments of health. But let's remember that the first social detriment of health is income. And are there places where secure housing and food security are accepted as a human rights issue? And can the argument be advanced in addition to the individual separate aspects that we speak about? And then William again has a blueprint for healthcare extensive consultation and report from the late 90s been consulted on regarding the health component of the budget. I'm not sure anybody can answer that, but I don't know if the 3 panelists want to give kind of some closing remarks with some of those comments, intertwined in what you may wish to say in closing. I don't know who wants to go first.
I mean, I can again speak to what we know, which is what the evidence tells us. To Stella's point, right, is that income matters, and income is an important protective factor, as well as an indicator for how somebody might be doing overall. That has to be coupled with, again, a really good, robust network of public services to be able to support someone. Again, the context that we currently live in and the narrative that we are given is that you are on your own. You need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and find a way to survive and succeed in our society. And if you can't do that, then you're shamed and blamed and told that you're not good enough, essentially. That is an approach. Again, I think the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. The reality is that inequality has become entrenched, poverty has become entrenched, our overall health and well-being is on the decline because we have maintained that ideological position that is how that government should play a minimal role in supporting individuals, and that the free hand of the market, as well as our benevolent capitalists, will be able to provide for all of our needs and all of our hopes. And again, if you are not able to participate in the economy, then that's on you, and negates the point And the fact that, as Danny mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, Nova Scotia is a low-wage economy, which is actually a terrible way for an economy to grow and to be able to provide us with what is needed. So again, really focusing on the proven policies that are going to increase wages, income, quality of life for individuals. There's a profound impact on our overall quality of life, particularly our economy. And so again, focusing on what are the proven policies that get us there is again a core part of what the alternative budget provides.
Thanks, Alex. Anyone else?
I could just give a bit of a closing remark for,
Yeah. Sure.
I guess, kind of the healthcare portion. Just two things. The first is that, as Christine said, this budget is not going to change the provincial budget that comes out next week because it's already done. But I hope the alternative budget, especially the healthcare section, is used to make people more aware, especially of privatization. We've seen a lot of that in our province, and it's a not very well known about topic. There's a lot of misinformation about it. So hopefully this provides a little bit of clarity to some people. So educate and spread it. And also just reflecting on some of the comments in the chat, the major determinants of health, the social determinants of health. Preventative health preventative healthcare is such an important part of healthcare, and it is overlooked because these things, their issues, income, education, things that don't really want to be dealt with, they're chronically underfunded, sorry. So yeah, it's important to bring awareness to that as well, is that the number one thing we can do for healthcare is actually stop it before it becomes an issue and then puts more pressure on our public system. So yes, thank you.
Thanks,
Maybe,
Ellen.
sorry, Danny, maybe I'll respond
Yeah.
in a way with some comments to,
Sure.
I think it's Midge. Something about human rights. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the government is contravening basic human rights every day that it doesn't address the issues that we've outlined. The UN has said that we all, and the Canadian government has signed on to the UN Declaration of Basic Rights. We all have the right to food and income and housing and all of the essentials. Government neglects them and contravenes them every day. Now, do we have the right to challenge it? Well, we know that there's the challenge in terms of the disability services, and hopefully we'll hear more about that, where the court actually did rule in the favor of those with disabilities, that in fact their rights were being infringed upon. Ideally, we don't have to go that way. Ideally, we don't have to intervene every time that our rights are, not being fulfilled. This is what we're trying to say, is if we shift our vision and we shift our framing, then we realize those human rights. I mean, we wrote a report on housing a few years ago. Again, we've integrated those recommendations into that report, but that report was framed to realize housing as a human right in our province. What would it take? Why do we need to invest so much in non-market? Because that is the way to support those who the market will never, ever serve. But let's be clear on that. Let's make sure that we invest in housing supports, but also the income that everybody's pointing to as a determinant of whether you get access to food. That is the number one determinant of food insecurity. It's income insecurity. And I mean, at the same time, as I think Alec pointed out, what we also invest in is actually empowering citizens to stand up and advocate. So we put in proactive, so we would staff a proactive enforcement of employment standards and labor standards in this province. That means it wouldn't be complaint-based. It would be, we'd go out there and see what are employers doing. We'd not only strengthen labor standards, which we also have to do, We have to address them. They're much too weak. They don't do enough to protect the health and safety and just work-life balance and everything else that workers should have access to in our province. We would also invest in staffing and proactively enforcing the Tenants Act that would actually support those who are in that relationship on the powerless side, the tenants. We would proactively enforce the tenant legislation. That means go out and actually see what is happening with landlords and not just support those who are able to challenge landlords through a formal process, but we're proactively enforcing that. We do invest, however, to support more legal aid services, so more Nova Scotians actually do have access to those services. We also invest in more what we call economic democracy and energy democracy. More of us need to be owning, whether that's through the cooperative model or other ways, what is happening in terms of our workplaces, but also in terms of energy. Can we support more communities to do community procurement of energy, actually own parts of the grid? How do we figure that piece out so that we have more say and get at making our energy a human right? So everybody has access to what they need. I think that is really what the, what underlines the alternative budget is realizing those human rights, but making it so that we don't need individual challenges necessarily, that we actually have governments that are proactive on that, on all of those fronts.
Thank you, Christine. So with that, we'll wind down the press conference this morning. The alternative budget for Nova Scotia, leave no one behind. I want to thank our panelists this morning, Alexandra Rose, Dr. Christine Saulnier, and Alex Stratford. And I want to thank all of you for your participation in this morning's press conference. And I think this will be available up on the CCPA website for people to view at some point after the webinar closes. Anyway, thanks everyone for joining, and hope you have a wonderful day and enjoy the snow.
Thanks, everyone. So great to see you all. Thanks for coming out, and thanks for your input and feedback and collaboration as always. So much appreciated.